Pernell "Sweet Pea" Whitaker was once untouchable, a defensive genius, a pound-for-pound king, and one of the most skilled boxers to ever live. But in 2019, at just 55 years old, he was struck by a car and killed in Virginia Beach. The headlines painted it as a tragic accident, but the truth is darker. Whitaker's life outside the ring was filled with demons, addiction, financial collapse, and isolation. And when you put the pieces together, you realize his death wasn't just a tragedy of fate, but the final chapter of a downfall that had been building for decades. July 14, 2019, should have been an ordinary summer night in Virginia Beach. But for Pernell Whitaker, it became the night that sealed his fate. Reports said he was walking across Northampton Boulevard, a busy 4-lane road, when he was struck by an SUV. The driver stayed on the scene and cooperated with police. Officially, it was labeled an accident. No alcohol, no drugs, no foul play. But to those who knew Sweet Pea, the circumstances didn't add up so neatly. Why was Whitaker crossing a dark, dangerous road late at night? Why was a man who had once been a millionaire, a world champion, and a Hall of Famer wandering alone, without security, without family, without even the protection of the sport he gave everything to? These questions haunted fans and insiders alike. The truth is that by 2019, Whitaker was living a fragile existence. Friends said he often walked long distances by himself, preferring solitude over company. Some suggested he was restless, unable to sleep, still haunted by regrets and demons. Others whispered that his financial troubles left him without even basic luxuries, like reliable transportation, forcing him to walk in unsafe conditions. Witnesses described the scene as heartbreaking. When emergency responders arrived, Whitaker was unresponsive. The man who had once danced around legends, who had slipped every punch with grace, was motionless on the pavement. He was pronounced dead at the scene, aged just 55. The official narrative, an accident, felt too simple for many. To them, Whitaker's death was not random. It was the tragic culmination of everything that had led him there. The addiction, the financial ruin, the isolation, the system that cheered him when he was on top and abandoned him when he fell. The car may have delivered the final blow, but the truth was that Sweet Pea had been walking toward tragedy for years. For fans, the news was devastating. Across the boxing world, tributes poured in. Fighters like Floyd Mayweather and Oscar De La Hoya called him the greatest defensive fighter they had ever seen. Mike Tyson tweeted simply, "Sweet Pea was special." But underneath the tributes was a sense of guilt. Boxing had let him down. The same sport that profited from his brilliance had left him to wander alone on a dark road in the final moments of his life. The night of his death wasn't just an accident, it was a metaphor. Pernell Whitaker spent his entire life dodging punches, slipping danger, and surviving battles no one thought he could win. But in the end, the one fight he couldn't avoid came not in a ring, but on a street in Virginia. And that is perhaps the darkest truth of all. Pernell Whitaker's story begins in Norfolk, Virginia, in 1964, where the world he was born into was as unforgiving as any boxing ring he would later step into. Raised in a working-class neighborhood marked by poverty, violence, and limited opportunity, Whitaker's childhood was a constant battle against the forces that swallowed so many young men in his community. His father, Raymond, was a laborer. His mother, Novella, worked long hours to keep food on the table. Life wasn't easy, but it was within this difficult environment that Pernell's fighting spirit was forged. At age 9, he walked into a local boxing gym, almost by accident. The dingy walls, the smell of sweat, and the sound of gloves hitting heavy bags became his sanctuary. In the ring, he discovered something remarkable. He wasn't just good, he was untouchable. His reflexes were cat-like, his defense uncanny. Trainers immediately recognized his gift. While other kids brawled, Pernell slipped punches, ducked, and countered with precision. He didn't fight like a child. He fought like a man who already understood survival. The nickname that would follow him forever, Sweet Pea, began as a misheard cheer from fans calling him Sweet Pete. It fit perfectly. His style was smooth, graceful, and unique. He didn't just fight to win, he fought to humiliate opponents, making them miss so badly they looked foolish. By his teenage years, Pernell was already a local hero, known across Norfolk as the boy who could outbox anyone who dared to step in front of him. But behind the early fame, darkness lingered. Norfolk was no safe haven. Drugs, gangs, and violence pulled at the edges of his life. He admitted later that he saw friends get consumed by the streets, some killed, others lost to addiction. Boxing became his lifeline, a way out of the chaos, a way to prove he could be more than just another name on the list of wasted talent. His mother pushed him, reminding him that his fists could carry him further than anything else. By the late 1970s, Pernell was not only a star in Virginia, but one of the most promising amateur boxers in the nation. He competed with ferocity, winning national Golden Gloves and catching the eye of boxing scouts. His natural talent was undeniable, yet even then, those close to him noticed something. Pernell had two sides. In the gym and ring, he was disciplined and focused. Outside, he was playful, reckless, and already experimenting with temptations, alcohol, late nights, and the fast life that seemed to come too soon. The early years shaped not just the champion, but the man who would later fall victim to his demons. The poverty, the environment, and the chaos of Norfolk planted scars in Pernell that fame and money would never fully erase. He escaped the streets physically, but emotionally. He carried them with him until the end. By the time the 1984 Olympics arrived in Los Angeles, Pernell "Sweet Pea" Whitaker was already a legend in the amateur ranks. His record was staggering. More than 200 wins, barely any losses. He had fought around the world, dazzling crowds with his defensive wizardry. To those who followed boxing closely, Whitaker wasn't just a contender for gold, he was a lock. He breezed through the tournament, making world-class fighters look ordinary. And in the final, he captured the gold medal that cemented his status as America's next great lightweight. The victory was more than just personal triumph. It was validation for a kid from Norfolk who had been told all his life that he wouldn't make it out. Standing on the Olympic podium, draped in gold, Whitaker felt untouchable. Reporters swarmed him. Promoters salivated at the thought of signing him. He was smooth on the mic, confident without arrogance, and carried an aura of invincibility. Turning professional was inevitable. He debuted later that same year, and almost immediately, his style translated perfectly to the pro game. Unlike many Olympic champions who struggled to adapt, Whitaker thrived. His footwork was poetry, his head movement a masterpiece. Commentators quickly labeled him the future of the sport, but with fame came pressure. Suddenly, Whitaker wasn't just fighting for himself or his family, he was fighting for an entire country that expected greatness every time he stepped into the ring. Promoters marketed him as the heir to Sugar Ray Leonard, another slick American star, but where Leonard had charisma and charm, Whitaker's style was more cerebral, more frustrating to casual fans who wanted knockouts instead of masterclasses. This tension between brilliance and marketability would follow him throughout his career. Behind the bright lights, the temptations of success began creeping in. Wealth and fame gave Whitaker access to things he had never dreamed of: parties, women, drugs. He loved the attention, but those who knew him best worried about his judgment. Even in his early years as a pro, whispers of cocaine use followed him. While his performances in the ring remained sharp, his personal life showed cracks. The gold medal made Whitaker a star, but it also chained him to expectations he could never fully escape. Every fight had to be dominant. Every performance had to be perfect. And while he delivered time and again, the weight of that spotlight was heavy. Sweet Pea had risen from Norfolk to global stardom, but the darker side of that success, the pressure and the temptations, was already beginning to shape the downfall that would haunt him for the rest of his life. By the late 1980s and into the 1990s, Pernell "Sweet Pea" Whitaker was no longer just a promising star. He was redefining the sport. At lightweight, he made champions look like amateurs. His footwork was like a dancer's, his defense impenetrable, and his timing razor-sharp. Whitaker wasn't simply beating opponents, he was embarrassing them. Watching him box was like watching someone play chess while everyone else played checkers. He slipped punches with such ease that opponents often looked frustrated, swinging at air, while Whitaker grinned and countered. His breakthrough came in 1989 when he dominated José Luis Ramirez, avenging a controversial loss from a year earlier. The performance was so lopsided that many began calling Whitaker the best defensive fighter since Willie Pep. From there, his resume only grew. He moved up in weight and defeated Azuma Nelson, Greg Hogan, and Buddy McGirt, capturing multiple world titles across divisions. His ability to control fights, regardless of the opponent's style, cemented his reputation as the pound-for-pound king of the sport. Then came the infamous fight with Julio César Chávez in 1993. Chávez was 87-0 at the time, considered unbeatable, and many saw Whitaker as a dangerous but doomed challenger. What happened stunned the world. For 12 rounds, Whitaker made Chávez miss wildly, peppering him with jabs and combinations, and showing defensive brilliance that had the crowd in awe. When the final bell rang, it was clear to almost everyone that Whitaker had won. But the judges called it a draw, one of the most controversial decisions in boxing history. The robbery, as many called it, became symbolic of Whitaker's career. Brilliant inside the ring, but constantly fighting against forces outside it. Politics, judges, and the system that seemed determined to deny him full recognition. He later admitted the Chávez decision scarred him deeply. "I beat him easy," he would say, "but they didn't want me to have it." Still, Whitaker pressed on. He moved up again to face Oscar de la Hoya in 1997, and though he lost on the scorecards, many felt he outboxed the younger star. Against Felix Trinidad in 1999, he was past his prime, but still showed flashes of brilliance. By the end of the decade, though, the miles were catching up with him. The brilliance that had once made him untouchable was fading, but even in decline, Whitaker's name still commanded respect. His professional career ended officially in 2001 after a broken clavicle against Carlos Bojorquez forced him to retire mid-fight. At 37, Sweet Pea was done. For most fighters, retirement is already a challenge, stripped of the structure and purpose that defined their lives. For Whitaker, retirement was devastating. Without boxing, the discipline that had anchored him disappeared. The demons he had kept at bay during his career now had full access to his life. In interviews years later, Whitaker admitted the loss of boxing left him empty. "I was born to fight," he said, "and when you take that away, what do you do?" The answer, tragically, was that he drifted. Addiction grew worse, financial troubles mounted, and the man once called the pound-for-pound king became another fallen legend, wandering far from the glory that defined his prime. The decline wasn't sudden. It was gradual, slow erosion over years. But by the early 2000s, it was clear Pernell Whitaker had gone from one of the greatest boxers alive to a man struggling just to hold himself together. And as history has shown, that struggle would only deepen in the years ahead, leading him down a path that ended in tragedy. By the early 2000s, Pernell Whitaker's career was finished, but his battles had only just begun. Without the rigid discipline of training camps and the clarity of fight nights, he was left with an empty schedule and a restless spirit. For years, whispers of cocaine use had followed him, but now the whispers became reality. The drug that had once been an occasional temptation grew into a full-blown addiction. Whitaker was arrested multiple times for cocaine possession throughout the 2000s. Each mugshot told a story the boxing world didn't want to face. The smiling, slick, untouchable Sweet Pea was gone. In his place was a frail, hollow-eyed man struggling against demons far more dangerous than any opponent he'd ever faced in the ring. Court-ordered rehab stints came and went, but they rarely stuck. The addiction wasn't just about the drug itself, it was about the escape it provided. Whitaker had grown up fighting against abandonment, poverty, and violence. Boxing gave him purpose and structure. Without it, he turned to substances to fill the void. Friends said he struggled with depression, often reminiscing about the glory days and lamenting how quickly fame faded. He didn't know how to live as a regular man, one associate recalled. He only knew how to live as a fighter. When that was gone, he was lost. The drugs also pulled him into public scandals. In 2002, Whitaker's mother famously sued him, demanding he be evicted from the home he had bought for her after his career peaked. The case made headlines, Sweet Pea being kicked out of his mother's house. The reality was sadder than the tabloids suggested. Whitaker was losing control of his finances, his behavior, and his relationships. Family bonds fractured, friends drifted away, and his once proud image was crumbling. The decline played out in public, but the depth of the struggle remained private. Whitaker would disappear for weeks at a time, lost to binges, only to resurface with apologies and promises to get clean. He managed brief comebacks as a trainer, but the shadow of addiction always followed him. The world saw a genius fighter, but behind closed doors, he was battling a storm that no defensive wizardry could slip. This period revealed the tragic duality of Pernell Whitaker. In the ring, he was untouchable. Outside of it, he was fragile, human, and deeply vulnerable. And as his drug battles consumed more of his life, the legacy he had worked so hard to build began slipping away, piece by piece, headline by headline. If drugs stripped Whitaker of his discipline, money, or rather, the loss of it, stripped him of his security. Over the course of his career, Whitaker had earned millions. His fights against Chavez, De La Hoya, and Trinidad brought him seven-figure paydays, and endorsements added to the fortune. Yet by the 2000s, he was broke. The reasons were many. Poor management and shady promoters took their cut. Bad investments drained accounts. But Whitaker himself bore much of the blame. He lived lavishly, spending freely on cars, jewelry, and entourages. Generous to a fault, he gave money away to friends and family without thought for the future. Like so many fighters before him, he assumed the money would never run out. The betrayal hurt as much as the losses. People he trusted, advisors, friends, even family, took advantage of him. His finances spiraled, and by the mid-2000s, Whitaker was forced to declare bankruptcy. The fall was stark, from Olympic gold and world titles to a man struggling to keep the lights on. The financial collapse was compounded by humiliation. Stories circulated of Whitaker pawning valuables, appearing disheveled, and relying on handouts. The once proud champion who had made legends look foolish in the ring was now being pitied. It wasn't just the loss of money, it was the loss of dignity. Even his attempts at rebuilding fell apart. Whitaker tried to transition into a full-time trainer, but the instability of his lifestyle made it difficult to sustain. He coached fighters here and there, showing flashes of brilliance in the corner, but he never became the respected elder statesman of the sport. Promoters hesitated to attach his name to projects, fearing unreliability. This financial ruin exposed the darker truth of boxing's system. Fighters are celebrated in their prime, but discarded once their value fades. Whitaker's story was a cautionary tale of what happens when the money runs out, the fame fades, and the sport moves on without you. By the 2010s, Sweet Pea had almost nothing left to show for his career. No mansion, no empire, no financial legacy for his children. What remained was a fractured family, broken trust, and the painful reality that boxing had given him everything and taken it all back. In the end, financial ruin didn't just leave him broke. It left him exposed, stripped of security and pride, wandering through life with no safety net. And this lack of stability would play a direct role in the tragic circumstances of his death years later. By the 2010s, Pernell Whitaker was no longer a fixture in the headlines, and for many casual fans, he had all but disappeared. But behind the scenes, he tried to rebuild his life in the only place he ever truly belonged, the boxing gym. Whitaker began coaching fighters in Virginia, hoping to pass on the defensive mastery that made him a legend. For those who worked with him, the experience was unforgettable. He still had the eye for detail, the ability to pick apart flaws in a fighter's style with surgical precision. He'd see things no one else saw. One former trainee recalled, he'd tell you how to slip a punch before you even knew you were open to it. But while his genius was intact, his personal struggles were never far away. The gym gave him purpose, but it wasn't enough to erase the years of of addiction and financial chaos. There were days when Whitaker showed up sharp and focused, barking instructions with the same fire that carried him to Olympic gold. Then there were days when he didn't show up at all, lost to old habits. For young fighters, it was a reminder that greatness doesn't guarantee stability. The isolation was worse than the addiction. Those who knew him best said Whitaker spent long stretches alone. His family life had fractured, his marriage ended, and he had a strained relationship with some of his children. His son, Pernell Jr., spoke publicly about how drugs had stolen his father away long before the fatal accident. "We lost him years ago," he said, a statement that cut deep for fans who still idolized the man they called Sweet Pea. Despite this, the boxing world still revered him. He was inducted into the International Boxing Hall of Fame in 2007, a moment that should have been triumphant. He gave a short, subdued speech, nothing like the flamboyant celebrations of his prime. Observers noticed how different he seemed, reserved, quiet, almost broken. For a fighter who had humiliated legends, it was painful to see him so diminished. Even in coaching, Whitaker never found stability. The sport he had given his life to gave him little in return. Promoters used his name when convenient, but never built a platform around him. Fans who caught glimpses of him at regional events were often shocked. He looked older than his years, gaunt and at times fragile. The whispers about his health grew louder. The lifestyle of drugs, financial stress, and decades of punches, whether given or taken, had left their mark. By the late 2000s and 10s, Whitaker was a ghost of the man who once dominated pound-for-pound lists. Still brilliant in flashes, but alone, underappreciated, and vulnerable. His isolation wasn't just physical, it was emotional. Forgotten by the system, estranged from parts of his family, and battling demons he couldn't shake. Sweet Pea's final years were a sad reminder that even the most untouchable fighter can't slip the punches of time and tragedy forever.